Ever fancied being a ghost? Want to give it a go? Here's how you would go about it. Many ancient cultures had the idea of the soul haunting its own body. At death, the soul liked to be near its former body, as if it were processing what had happened and coming to terms with it before going on a new adventure. The soul liked to linger near its familiar physical vessel. Someone, a sensitive intuitive, might even detect the presence of the soul as an aura in the vicinity of the grave or tomb, or even as a faint, spectral image, a ghost. Such a ghost might also haunt a specific place of importance to it, where it fell in love, or where it was betrayed or murdered, or whatever. By hanging around, it seeks to resolve psychological issues. It wants closure. Only then can it move on. To understand ghosts, you need to understand the out-of-body experience. Think of the soul as an entity that has an in-body experience, whereby it inhabits a body and lives through the body, experiencing the physical world through this physical form. The body acts as a physical filtering mechanism for the soul, restricting its sensory awareness to the area around the body. But the soul is potentially mind at large. Cambridge philosopher C.D. Broad wrote, "Each person is at each moment capable of remembering all that has ever happened to him and of perceiving everything that is happening everywhere in the universe." The function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us from being overwhelmed and confused by this mass of largely useless and irrelevant knowledge, by shutting out most of what we should otherwise perceive or remember at any moment, and leaving only that very small and special selection which is likely to be practically useful. According to such a theory, each one of us is potentially mind at large. When restricted by the body, the soul is mind at little. Freed from the body, it is mind at large. The liberated soul is so much more powerful than the confined soul. Consciousness is associated with the imprisoned soul. The unconscious, or aspects of it, including what we might call the higher self, is associated with the unconfined soul. The unconfined soul can also venture much more deeply into the collective unconscious with all of its awesome archetypes. At death, the soul necessarily transitions from IB to OBE, from embodied to disembodied. The soul could then concentrate on reincarnation and coming back to the world in a new physical body. However, it could equally go on OBE travels and roam the universe. Wouldn't you give that a try? Or it could obsessively hang around the places of its former life. Maybe the ancient Egyptians and Greeks were right that the soul lurked around the body and its grave or tomb. Cremation was seen by the Greeks as a way of ending the soul's relationship with the body so that it would have to move on. The Egyptians, by contrast, mummified the body so that the soul would never want to leave it. Or at least not until the time was right. When we look back at the ancient world, we are not seeing it through their eyes and experiences. It's possible that the human psyche was quite different back then. That's what Julian Jaynes's bicameral hypothesis claims. It's possible that souls in those times did have a tendency not to move on at death. It's possible that souls, now in OBE mode, stayed in the vicinity of their former life and were in some way detected by the living, as auras, or spectral creatures. Remember, for Homer, the psyche was an exact likeness of a person, their double. We can imagine that the living did not feel that the dead were really gone, and they were wary of the souls of the dead and their power, especially in the case of revenge. Homer wanted the soul to go away and never trouble the living again. He had the idea of the psyche as being an unconscious double of the person that, after cremation, went to a place with no exits, Hades, the underworld. From there, it could exert no further influence on the living. It's obvious that there were two Greek attitudes towards the dead, probably relating to the difference between sensing types and intuitive types. Let's imagine that intuitives were able to tune into the souls of the dead and see their auras, or spectral traces, so had a lived experience of the souls still being around. They might, bicamerally, have clearly heard them speak. Maybe they had vivid dreams about them. But what about sensing types, very much concerned with the physical, and with little attunement to the immaterial world? They would have little or no knowledge of the presence of the souls of the dead, and would be puzzled by the testimony of the intuitives, since none of that would be apparent to them. Homer was no doubt one of these sensing types. So, he was at pains to get rid of souls from the land of the living as soon as possible. He wanted them out of the way. He wanted the living not to have to be concerned with them. You know, just like scientists and philosophers today, who go out of their way to deny the reality of the soul and dismiss it as nonsense and fantasy. Because these people are body-oriented, sensory types. They cannot conceive of invisible, immaterial minds. They cannot intuit them. They cannot use reason and logic to think their way to the world of the soul. For these people, everything reduces to what they can sense.